Welcome to my channel. Please support with subscribe, like, and share. Thank you. It began with a smile. Not the kind that draws a crowd or flashes across a screen, but one that lingers, quietly. The kind that makes you wonder if you've seen it before, maybe in another lifetime. When Emily arrived in Portland, that gray December morning, she wasn't expecting anything special. Just a quiet winter with her Uncle James and Aunt Clara, away from the noise of Los Angeles. She was tired of fake laughter, short-lived friendships, and a job that never loved her back. Portland was supposed to be her pause, her restart button. But then she saw him. James wasn't the kind of man who filled the room with loud confidence. He was warmth in quiet places, the smell of coffee brewing at 6 a.m., the sound of an old record humming through the house, the soft laughter that made even silence feel safe. Emily remembered how, as a child, she used to sit beside him while he worked in his basement studio, a space filled with wooden furniture, sketchbooks, and that faint smell of pine. Now, years later, stepping back into that same house felt strange. He was older, yes, but time had only softened him like old whiskey and good stories. When he greeted her at the door, his smile reached his eyes, the same blue-gray ones that once promised safety. "Welcome home, Em," he said, his voice steady, familiar. Home. That word hit differently. That evening, while snow tapped softly against the window, Aunt Clara called it a night early. Emily offered to help James clean up after dinner, but he waved her off with that same gentle grin. Still, she followed him into the basement, the studio where he'd once taught her how to draw trees that breathe. It hadn't changed much. The wooden workbench still stood under the same hanging light. There were sketches scattered everywhere, some of landscapes, some of faceless figures, and in the corner sat an old radio, still alive with soft jazz. "You kept this place exactly the same," Emily said with a small smile, brushing her hand over a dusty sketchpad. James glanced at her. "Some things shouldn't change. They hold memories together." There was something in the way he said it that made her chest tighten. He wasn't talking about the studio anymore, and she knew it. They talked for hours that night. About art, about how people lose pieces of themselves trying to please others. About how dreams quietly fade, not because they die, but because no one looks after them anymore. It was strange how easy it was to talk to him. How her words flowed, unfiltered, and how his quiet nods made her feel seen. Not as a niece, not as a visitor, but as someone who finally mattered. When their laughter softened into silence, Emily realized how late it was. Midnight. Snow kept falling outside, making the world seem smaller, quieter. "I should go to bed," she whispered, but her feet didn't move. James smiled gently. "You always said that when you didn't want the night to end." She looked down, a shy warmth crawling up her neck. "You still remember that?" Every word. That line lingered in the air, gentle but heavy. The radio hummed, and for a brief second, the space between them didn't feel like family. It felt like something unnamed, something you weren't supposed to feel but couldn't help wanting to understand. Emily cleared her throat. "Good night, Uncle James." He nodded, but his eyes didn't look away. "Good night, Em." That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She kept hearing his voice, the calm in it, the kindness, and something else she couldn't name. She told herself it was nostalgia, that it was just the comfort of an old bond rediscovered. But deep down, she knew this was different. Morning came too quickly. Clara had already left for work, and James was in the kitchen, humming as he made breakfast. "Coffee?" he asked. "Please," Emily said, taking the mug he offered. Their fingers brushed. Just for a second. But it felt longer than that. "Do you still draw?" he asked. She smiled sadly. "Not since college. Life got busy." He nodded. "Then maybe it's time to start again." His tone wasn't commanding, it was hopeful, like he wanted her to believe she still had time to find herself again. That small encouragement, that subtle attention, it meant more than she could say. Later that week, while Clara worked late shifts, Emily often found herself in the basement again. Sometimes helping him sort old canvases, sometimes just talking. Each night, their conversations grew deeper. One evening, while the rain played softly against the windows, James looked up from his sketchbook. "You know," he said, "you remind me of someone I used to draw." "Who?" Emily asked. He hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Someone I could never quite capture. She always looked back at me like she had more to say." The room felt smaller then. She didn't know what to say. So she just looked at him, waiting. James looked down again, pretending to focus on his drawing. "Don't read into that," he said softly. I just mean you have that same look sometimes. But Emily did read into it. She couldn't stop. One evening, when the power went out during a storm, they found themselves in that basement again, candles flickering, shadows dancing on the walls. The warmth from the small fireplace mixed with the smell of rain and pine wood. This feels like one of your old stories, she said, smiling nervously. James chuckled, except you always changed the ending. Maybe this time I won't, she whispered. He looked at her, then really looked, and something in his eyes flickered, like recognition, like danger, like longing buried too deep to name. Neither spoke for a while. Only the storm did. And when the lights came back, Emily realized her heart wasn't the same anymore. It had crossed something quietly, softly, like a secret you never planned to tell. But what she didn't know was that James had a secret of his own, something that would soon turn every late-night talk, every warm smile, into something far more complicated than she ever imagined. The basement had heard every word they'd said, every silence they didn't break, and it would not keep their secrets forever. The next morning felt heavier, though the sky outside was clear for the first time in days. Emily sat at the kitchen table, watching sunlight spill through the window like honey. But her mind was still trapped in last night's storm. The soft glow of candles, James's voice, that look in his eyes. He was her uncle, and yet that word didn't explain the way her heart reacted when he spoke, when he smiled. It wasn't wrong, but it wasn't simple either. She tried to shake the thoughts off, sipping her coffee and pretending to scroll through her phone, but her gaze kept drifting toward the basement door, half open as if calling her back. James wasn't around that morning. He'd gone out early to run errands. Clara had left a note saying she'd be home late again. The house was quiet, too quiet. Emily stood up, hesitated for a heartbeat, and then walked down the steps to the basement. The air felt the same, warm, filled with the scent of old wood and graphite. But something new sat on the table. A sketchbook, open, and on the page her face, her eyes, the soft outline of her smile, captured in pencil strokes that felt almost alive. It wasn't a casual doodle. It was detailed, patient, intimate. Every curve of her face looked studied, memorized. Her breath caught. She knew he'd drawn people before, landscapes, strangers, memories, but never her. Not like this. She closed the book gently, trying to calm the rush of emotions. Curiosity, flattery, guilt, all of them tangled together until she couldn't tell which one belonged to her. When James returned that afternoon, he found her in the kitchen, pretending to cook. "Smells good," he said, placing a bag of groceries on the counter. She smiled weakly. "Just pasta. I hope that's okay." "It's perfect." He started chopping vegetables, his movements calm and rhythmic. She watched him for a moment, the way he always hummed quietly when he worked. She wanted to ask about the drawing, but how could she? "Did you finish anything new today?" she asked instead, trying to sound casual. James looked up, half smiling. "Maybe." "Why do you ask?" She hesitated, just wondering. His eyes lingered on hers for a second too long. "You were in the studio, weren't you?" Her heart skipped. I didn't mean to look through your things." "I know." He set down the knife, sighing softly. "I shouldn't have left that sketch open." "So it was me," she whispered. He nodded, his voice low. "I didn't plan to show you. It just happened." She searched his face for an explanation. "Why?" James took a breath. "Because sometimes, when you're surrounded by silence, you draw what makes the silence bearable." The words hit deep. She looked away, pretending to stir the pot even though it didn't need stirring. Dinner was quiet after that, but it wasn't the same kind of quiet. It carried something unspoken between them, a current neither of them wanted to name. When Clara came home later, she chatted cheerfully about her day, completely unaware. Emily smiled, nodded, played along, but she could barely focus. Every time James laughed, she felt her chest tighten. That night, as she tried to sleep, she kept replaying his words in her head. "You draw what makes the silence bearable." It wasn't just art, it was confession. The following evening, Emily returned to the basement. She told herself it was to paint again, to feel like her old self. But deep down, she knew it was because that room now held something of them. James wasn't there, but his things were, his brushes, his sketches, his unfinished canvases. She found another one resting against the wall, a portrait still in progress. It wasn't her this time, but the woman looked familiar. Same eyes, same faint smile. And when Emily looked closer, she realized it was Clara, her aunt from years ago. The lines were soft, affectionate, but not the same as the new sketch of her. That one had emotion, longing, and for the first time, Emily wondered Had James ever truly loved his wife? When he came down a few minutes later, he looked surprised to see her. "I thought you'd gone out," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "I was just looking at your work," she said quietly. "You're talented, James. But there's something different in these drawings." He raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" "They feel alive, like you're trying to say something you can't say out loud." He didn't answer, just stared at her long enough for her pulse to start racing. Finally, he said, "Maybe you see too much. Maybe you draw too much truth." The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was charged like rain waiting to fall. He took a slow breath. "Emily, But just then, the sound of a car door slammed outside. Clara was home early. They both froze. Emily stepped back, her heart thundering. "We should go upstairs." James nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. As they left the basement, neither of them looked back at the sketches, but both knew something had shifted, quietly and permanently. That night, as snow began to fall again, Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Every part of her wanted to forget, to erase that drawing, that silence, that almost confession. But deep down, she knew the story wasn't over. The basement still held something waiting. Something that wouldn't stay buried much longer. The house had grown quieter in the days that followed. Not the kind of quiet that soothes you. The kind that listens. Emily could feel it every time she walked past the basement door. Something unspoken hovered there, waiting to be faced. But she tried to fill the silence with small distractions. Morning walks, cooking, sketching. Yet, no matter what she did, her thoughts kept circling back to James. He, too, seemed different now. His laughter was softer, his glances shorter. Every time their eyes met, there was hesitation, like two people standing too close to a line. They shouldn't cross but couldn't step away from either. One evening, Clara left for a weekend trip to visit her sister in Seattle. She hugged Emily goodbye at the door, unaware of the storm quietly building between the two people she left behind. "Keep the house warm," she said cheerfully, "and don't let James forget to eat." Emily smiled, forcing herself to sound light. "I'll make sure of it." But the moment the car disappeared down the road, the silence inside the house deepened, heavy, expectant. Later that night, James sat in the living room, sketchbook on his lap, the fire painting gold across his face. "You don't sleep early anymore," Emily said softly, standing at the doorway. He smiled faintly. "Neither do you." She walked closer, hesitating before sitting on the couch opposite him. The air felt charged, fragile, but alive. "Can I see what you're working on?" she asked. He hesitated, then turned the book toward her. It was a landscape this time, the river near their cabin from when she was little. The lines were gentle, nostalgic. "It's beautiful," she whispered. James chuckled softly. "You used to say that about everything I drew." "That's because you made even ordinary things look like they mattered." Their eyes met just for a moment, and it was enough. Enough to remind them both of what they were trying to hide. He broke the gaze first, closing the sketchbook. "I think I'll call it a night." But as he stood, something fell from between the pages. An envelope, yellowed and old. Emily bent down quickly to pick it up. Her name wasn't on it, but Clara's was. Clara Reynolds. The handwriting was unmistakably James's. Her heart jumped. "You dropped this," she said, handing it to him. He froze. For a moment, his calm expression cracked, not in guilt, but in pain. "Thank you," he said quietly, taking it from her hand. But instead of putting it away, he stared at the envelope as though debating something deep inside. "What is it?" Emily asked gently. James exhaled slowly. "Something I wrote a long time ago but never gave her. Some things are better left unsent." There was something in his voice, regret, maybe, or longing for a life that had drifted away. Emily didn't press, but later that night, when James had gone to bed, curiosity got the better of her. She crept down to the basement, drawn by something she couldn't explain. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was that ache of wanting to understand him, truly understand him. The desk drawer was slightly open, and inside lay the same envelope. It hadn't been sealed. Her fingers trembled as she pulled it out. The letter began simply, "Clara. I don't know when we stopped being the same people who dreamed together. You've built walls around your heart, and I've built silence around mine. I keep painting the things I can't say to you. Maybe one day, you'll see them and understand. But lately, there's someone who reminds me of everything we used to be. Someone who feels like a second chance I shouldn't want." Emily stopped reading, her pulse thundering. The ink blurred slightly, as if written with hesitation, or maybe tears. She closed the letter quickly, her heart racing. She didn't need to read the rest. She knew who he meant. And yet, It wasn't anger she felt. It was something softer, something dangerous. She returned the letter to the drawer, quietly as she'd found it, but the words wouldn't leave her. Someone who feels like a second chance I shouldn't want. Was that her? Was that what all those glances meant? Those late-night talks? Those quiet smiles? The next morning, Emily avoided him. She spent the day out in the garden, painting, trying to lose herself in color. But James eventually found her there, brush in hand, sunlight falling across her face. "You've started painting again," he said gently. She nodded. "It helps me think." He looked at her canvas, the beginnings of a face, unfinished. "You're painting someone." "Maybe," she said softly. Their eyes met again, and this time, neither looked away. He stepped closer, stopping just a breath away. "Emily," he began, but his voice faltered. "Don't," she whispered, shaking her head. "We can't, I know," he said quickly, stepping back. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him. I don't want you to think I don't care." "I never thought that," she said, her voice trembling. For a moment, the wind carried only silence between them, the kind that felt like the edge of something about to happen, something neither of them could undo. That night, when the house went dark again, Emily couldn't sleep. She kept hearing those words from the letter. Over and over, someone who feels like a second chance. I shouldn't want. But what she didn't know was that the letter wasn't the only thing James had hidden. There was another sketch, one she hadn't seen yet, and it would change everything when she did. The next few days felt like walking on glass. Every conversation between Emily and James was careful, too careful, every glance short-lived, every word measured. And yet, the air between them never felt empty. It felt full, heavy with everything they didn't say. Emily spent most of her mornings painting by the window, where the winter sun slipped through in soft golden stripes. James spent his hours downstairs in the basement again, sketching like a man trying to lose himself in the rhythm of his own hands. But silence has a way of stirring the truth, and sometimes, it shows up when you least expect it. One evening, when the snow began to fall again, James called up to her from the basement. Can you help me for a minute?" His voice was calm, but something in it sounded weary. She walked downstairs, brushing her hair back, heart quickening without reason. The basement felt colder that night. The air smelled faintly of turpentine and cedar. A half-finished canvas stood on the easel, turned away from her view. "I need a hand with the frame," he said. Reaching for a nail box, she helped him steady it, her fingers brushing against his, a small spark, unspoken, but undeniably there. "Thank you," he murmured. She smiled faintly. "You could have called anyone else." "There isn't anyone else," he said simply. The words hung there, quiet but true. As he worked, she looked around the room. The walls were lined with old sketches, some hidden under cloths, others stacked carelessly, but one, sitting half-tucked under a pile of papers, caught her eye. "Can I see this one?" she asked softly, already reaching for it. James turned quickly, almost too quickly. "It's not finished," he said, but it was too late. She had already lifted the edge of the paper. And there she was again, herself. Not just her face this time, but a full portrait standing by the window, light falling across her shoulders, a quiet melancholy in her eyes. It was beautiful, painful, honest. She looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. "When did you draw this?" James looked down, his hands tightening around the brush he was holding. "A few nights ago." "Why?" He hesitated. "Because sometimes, when I draw you, the world feels still again." Emily's throat tightened. "You shouldn't say things like that." "I know," he said softly, "but that doesn't stop them from being true." The room fell silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the old radio, the one that had always filled their nights. A slow jazz tune drifted through the air, smooth and sad. Emily took a step closer, her voice low. "You wrote it in your letter about someone who felt like a second chance." His eyes lifted slowly to hers. For a moment, he didn't speak. Then, finally, he said, "You weren't supposed to read that." "I know," she said, her voice trembling, "but I did." He exhaled deeply, running a hand through his hair. "It wasn't meant to hurt you. I just needed to say it somewhere, even if no one ever saw it." "But I did see it," she whispered. "Yes," he said, "and now you know how wrong it feels, and how impossible it is to stop." She turned away, tears pricking her eyes, not out of shame, but from the sheer ache of understanding. "James, this can't be anything. You know that." "I know," he said quietly, his voice breaking like old wood, "but it already is something." The power flickered then, as if the universe itself hesitated. The lights dimmed, then came back, their shadows stretching long against the walls. Emily took a deep breath and faced him again. We need to stop this before it ruins everything. Clara loves you. He looked away. Clara loves the version of me I stopped being years ago. The truth in that sentence hit like cold wind. She stepped closer, her tone soft but firm. Then find him again. The man she fell for. You owe her that much. James met her eyes. There was no anger there, only sadness. Deep and quiet. You sound like someone who still believes love can be fixed. He said gently. Maybe I have to, she replied. They stood there for a long time, neither moving, both knowing this was goodbye to something that had never even begun. When Emily finally turned to leave, James said, Emily, for what it's worth, you reminded me what it feels like to feel alive again. She paused at the stairs, tears threatening to fall. Then promise me you'll stay that way. For her? Not for me. He nodded slowly. I promise. That night, Emily packed her things quietly. She couldn't stay, not when every corner of the house carried his shadow. Before leaving, she slipped one of her small paintings, a sunrise over the river, onto his work table. On the back, she'd written a single line. Some silences are worth remembering, but not repeating. Then, without another word, she left the house while the sky was still dark. But what she didn't know was that her leaving would change everything, because the next morning, when Clara returned, she would find the basement open, the painting on the table, and the letter Emily had accidentally left behind. And that discovery would turn every secret into consequence. The morning after Emily left, the snow had stopped. The world outside looked quiet, untouched, like nothing had happened. But inside that old Portland house, everything had changed. When Clara returned from Seattle, she walked through the front door humming softly, setting her suitcase down by the stairs. She called out for Emily, expecting her bright voice to echo back. Only silence answered. Then she saw the basement door open, the light still on. That was unusual. James never left it that way. James, she called, stepping down the creaky steps. He was there, sitting at his work table, staring at a small painting resting beside an unfinished sketch. He looked lost, older somehow, like someone who had spent the night searching for peace and found none. Clara's eyes fell on the painting, a sunrise over the river. On the back, she saw the handwriting. Some silences are worth remembering, but not repeating. She frowned slightly, then noticed the letter, her name written in James's hand. The old letter Emily had found days ago. It was lying open now. James, she said softly, what's this? He looked up slowly, his eyes tired but calm. It's something I should have given you years ago. She picked it up, reading in silence. Her expression changed gradually, confusion, hurt, and then quiet understanding. When she finished, she looked at him, her voice trembling but controlled. You wrote about someone else. He didn't deny it. I did, Emily. He closed his eyes briefly. Yes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Only the sound of the wind brushed against the old windows. Clara took a deep breath. I knew she brought something out of you. I just didn't know it was this. I never meant for it to happen, James said softly. It wasn't what you think. It was connection, a reminder of who I used to be. She saw me when I'd stopped seeing myself. Clara looked at him for a long time, searching, remembering, hurting. And me? When did you stop seeing me? He didn't answer right away. His silence was enough. She set the letter down gently. Maybe that's the saddest part, she said quietly. That it took someone else to wake up what I lost in you. Then, instead of anger, she did something unexpected. She smiled faintly. Sad, tired, but real. You always said art was about honesty. Maybe this is what honesty looks like when it finally comes too late. That evening, James watched from the porch as Clara packed a small overnight bag. She wasn't leaving for good, not yet, just space, time. Before she left, she turned to him. Do you love her? He hesitated. No, I loved what she reminded me of: youth, hope, beginnings. But I care about her too much to ever let that ruin us. Clara nodded slowly. Then don't let it make this house mean something again. And with that, she drove away into the gray distance. Weeks passed. Winter softened into early spring. The snow melted, leaving muddy footprints of forgotten days behind. Emily didn't return to Portland. She sent one letter, short, kind, and steady. Dear James, I hope Clara is well. I hope the house feels warmer now. I've moved to Seattle, painting again, teaching small art classes. Sometimes I draw the old studio, just the light and the shelves, not the people. Some memories belong only once. Thank you for believing I could still create. Take care of her, and yourself. Emily James read that letter every night for a week before finally placing it in a wooden box along with the sunrise painting she left behind. Then, one quiet evening, he returned to the basement, the place where everything had started and silently ended. He picked up his brush and began a new canvas, not of Emily, not of Clara, but of the river wide, endless, reflecting a golden dawn. Months later, Clara came back. They didn't talk about the past, or the letter, or the girl who'd brought the silence alive. They just sat together by the fire, the same old radio humming in the background. After a while, Clara said softly, "You're painting again." "I never really stopped," he replied. "I just changed what I was painting for." She smiled. "Then maybe we both can start over." And for the first time in a long time, his smile, that same warm, gentle smile, felt true again. As for Emily, she found peace too. Her art began to sell. Her students loved her. Every now and then, she'd catch herself sketching a quiet smile she couldn't explain, not out of longing, but gratitude for what it taught her about love, boundaries, and how even the wrong feelings can lead to the right kind of healing. Because sometimes, love doesn't end with two people together. Sometimes, it ends with both of them finally becoming who they were meant to be. The end.